I didn't want to stay true to the comic at all. No. I actually really loved, this is a comic that came out quite a while ago, so I really loved the interpretation that Roberto brought to it, the distinction of understanding what made that story so grabbing, of fans then, and what it needed to be now, and where the focus needed to be. I think there's something really powerful and really beautiful about the message that this particular project brings, and I think the fans of the book, I think, will really appreciate it.
What we had, it was so good. We were family. But that was pre-war. I lost my son in the evacuation.
Christian! Where is he?
Manhattan.
You will be stuck in an active war zone.
Yeah, the graphic novel came out 15 years ago, and it was a different time. The graphic novel at that point presented a pretty chilling idea of war in our own backyard. It was post 9/11. 15 years later, it really resonates on a completely different level, and it just needed that sort of updating. It posits a world where, our divisions have gotten the best of us, and so I really wanted to recreate that world in a way where we're not dwelling on that at all. It's not really about the war. It's not about how we got to war. I'm not interested in that. It takes place 8 years later into the war. It starts there. It's about the people of the DMZ, and it looks forward. It's about rebirth, about reclamation of self, about reclamation of land, and it's a story of people coming together, which is the thesis of the entire thing.
Those were like the images that I most loved when I went through the books. Growing up in an abandoned building, the Lower East Side, as that was my childhood, it brought me back to that feeling of, when no one else is coming to save you, when you're not, sort of thinking that society is as the place to go to, that you just really actually look to your neighbor, and you look to yourself and what you can bring, and create and build. That tenacity is what, really, that is the texture of this. And I loved that, watching when, in the book, the snipers that were sending each other messages, or, the rooftop restaurant that had the community garden. Like, those were the moments that most stood out to me in the story, because it was the life of it, the dystopian, sad, depressing, scary, just negativity is what we always, the cynicism is what kind of brings us to it. You get curious about how would you live in that type of chaos, but it's the weeds that break through the cement that is, I think, keeps you coming back for more, and that's what we focused on in this, and I think it's exactly what we need to experience right now.
There's a new world coming, and it's just around the bend.
Damn it, Nova! Stay low!
There's a new world coming.
Whether you're a fan of the graphic novel or completely new to the story, the conceit itself never gets old. I mean, the idea of the most wealthy cosmopolitan city in the world being turned upside down, and essentially those who remain are either there by choice because they didn't want to leave their homes due to the forces of war, or were abandoned. That idea, with everything dilapidating and fall apart, and yet still somehow maintaining hope, this idea of survival and the possibility of rebuilding a community together, like, that's something that everyone can relate to, and that's a really completely compelling idea, which it's a story he paints on an incredibly large canvas, but tells a very intimate, what ultimately ends up being kind of a familial story, a story about family and about community.
Some of you chose to stay here. Some of you had been left behind. All of you survived.
The first episode was shot prior to the pandemic.
2 years ago. Yeah.
The second episode was shot a year and a half after everything shut down, which physically, I mean, I had a couple of sourdough loaves and pizzas and stuff. So to maintain that, the physical nature of it is very demanding. So that was a challenge in and of itself, but it's also, it speaks to the circumstances of the DMZ, survival, what it entails. Parco and Skell are people who rely on power and
violence.
And violence. That's how we survive. That's how we make our place on the DMZ. And that's a circumstance of it. But there's so much more to the story that Roberto does such a beautiful job in elaborating on.
This show is so emblematic of Ava DuVernay and what her mission in life as a storyteller is, and really emblematic of the kind of stories that Roberto wants to tell, which is telling a universal tale that really shines a light on who we are. People from diverse backgrounds, cultures, races, languages, religions, all being what we are, which is human. And I think it was a great joy for each of us actors every day to come to work with one another, knowing that in these circumstances, as actors, we were not the exoticized other, like on the periphery of this particular tale. We were front and center, each and every one of us. And I can't tell you how, just how reinforcing that is as a human being, as a man of color myself, to show up to work and know that this story is about us, each and every one of us.
You are looking at a world that is sort of playing out the power politics through the most primal methods possible, right? So you're dealing with hand-to-hand combat as well as negotiations about the price of flour, etc. You're dealing with an environment that distills all of the conflict that we face every day, still to this day. And I think in some ways removes the sheen and the patina that we place upon things and exposes that at our heart, how far are we from this state? How much are we actually evolving ourselves? And I think the answer, honestly, is that we do adapt. There's something quite hopeful in the knowledge that things never actually end. They simply change and they move forward.
It must be said that Rosario, as the number one on the call sheet, as the woman who had to show up to work every single day and be in virtually every scene in the movie, the 4-part miniseries, she was a fearless leader, tireless, confident, engaging, warm, inviting, not just to us, her fellow thespians, but the crew as well. And that really sets the tone for the entire experience. And bottom line, she kicks ass. She really does a beautiful job in this film, in this miniseries. And for those of us who got to engage physically, either with each other or with others in the set, that's part of the childhood dream too, is working out and looking at choreographed, like the ballet of what a fight could be. So all the fireworks and energy you expect from a graphic novel, as portrayed in a television series, that's all there too. So you have this great human story, but you also have a lot of action in the thing too.
I love that the power isn't only displayed though physically. There's a lot of mental gymnastics these characters go through to perpetuate themselves forward. They're really scrappy, and the bluffing and the posturing and the navigating, maneuvering is really remarkable, and you can see them, sometimes they convince themselves, and other times, they're really just, they're hoping that tone of voice, that they were able to take the shakiness out of their voice because they know how much counts in that moment and how they skirt through. Like, I think you really feel the present moment each beat as we move forward because the stakes are so high. There is no, there's nothing casual about any of the interactions. No conversation feels light. Everything carries a weight, and I really loved that. I loved that kind of the choreography physically, but also the dancing mentally that was going on with these characters. You're seeing people play chess, and I love watching characters, not just the actors. I like watching characters think. I want to feel like I'm really, in a story with stakes, and that never lets up. I think the fact that we just had these 4 episodes and we had Roberto, who never got his writer's room. He had to just be the one who would get all the texts and the voice notes and the emails and
wouldn't have it any other way.
The conversations about what every comma meant. We had some very strong guiding lights through this story, and it was really fun because you know, we knew everything could shift on a dime, you know, and these characters felt it, and I feel like that's going to keep pulling the audience member through, which doesn't always happen on something that's just dependent on action.